Well, I hope you had a useful insights that was provided by Jim and by the minister. And myself and Wilson will be taking you through the next part here. And we're going to do a collaborative presentation as part of what this is all about. It's all about collaboration. So let's just kickstart this session here. Yes, please. We have heard enough of big data. And I think one of the wonderful things about big data is, and also alluded to by Jim and by Dr. Balakrishnan, is about the fact that you actually are now going to have an abundance of information. So the question is, when you have abundance of information, what do you do? How do you deal with this? So both myself and Wilson will try and figure out and suggest some ways that you can actually try and cull some of these streams of data and figure out insights into it and act on it. We have put up a hashtag there, HEX, OIS2013, if you want to tweet about it or you want to ask us questions, because I think we may not have time later to ask questions, but please do hashtag it, and we'll try and reply to you through the social media. Next slide. So, big data, where did it come from? It came from computational sciences. That's the origin of big data as a term, as an understanding, where there's a lot of data being generated. The Genomic Project is a good example of that. When you have suddenly a lot of data, what do you do with this? One of the bigger problems we were trying to figure out for all of us is the fact that there's a lot of data coming in. It is the volume of data coming in. How quickly is it coming in? That's the bigger problem that we are facing. And as Dr. Balakrishnan said, 1 trillion devices in the Internet of Things. That's an enormous amount of things to be looking at in terms of data. So, what's the big deal? This is the big deal. This is the tsunami that we are talking about. This is a slide. It's very busy, and rightfully so. It's because it's highlighting some of the major issues that we are actually facing with. The amount of data. In the center, it says every minute of the day, how much data is being created. If you just look at 1 o'clock, it says Google receives over 2 million search queries per minute every day. Let's look at 3 o'clock. $272,000 are spent every minute on online shopping. Let's look at 11 o'clock. YouTube, 48 hours of video is being uploaded every minute. Who gets to watch these 48 hours of video? Have you watched 48 hours of video? It's non-trivial. That's an enormous amount of data here. Next slide. We now have the tools. We do have some of the technologies, but we can still use more of them. We also require these technologies to be real-time capable, because that's when the power of the insight comes in. Next slide. So, having said that, what's in it for me? If you were wondering what the acronym there is, in case you were wondering, I just want to make sure you're awake. What's in it for me? So today, data is being gathered and stored in enormous quantities, volume, a lot. Okay, as you saw the slide earlier. Next one. And it is coming in like worse than a fire hose. It's tsunami. It's probably worse than a tsunami. It's a lot. And more importantly, the type of data is also amazing. We are not just talking about one particular type of data. We are not talking about structured data. We are talking about just an enormous variety of data. Which therefore is nice segue into the 3 V's. I'm sure you may have heard of this, but if you haven't, the gentleman by the name of Doug Laney from Gartner coined these, or kind of taxonomized the idea of big data with these 3 V's: volume, velocity, and variety. There are a few more V's that he has actually come up with. There are now 7 V's that he says, but we'll stick to the first 3 V's because that really exemplifies the issues that we are trying to face with. Which brings you nicely to the next one, and I'll let my co-conspirator take care of that.
Yeah, okay. So in the space of business analytics, just to lead on from what Harish was talking about in terms of variety, some of the challenges that companies face today is that the data sources are pretty much from prepared sources, and pretty much the problems are quite known. But what is really interesting for a lot of companies and users would be basically the myriad of data sources that are coming from all over the place. So you have unstructured information, you have information from sensors, from web logs, user behaviors and all that. And what is particularly interesting for a lot of companies would be what are the kinds of insights that we can actually gather for problems that we don't know about, but could be interesting for companies to have an advantage. So let's look at some of the what-ifs in terms of the use cases. So, for example, I think this is probably one of the examples that is quite relevant to a lot of us. Taking a train in the morning to work, and you're looking at the situation in terms of the congestion. What if you can know how crowded those trains are and when to move to the right platform that is perhaps less crowded? The information will be very valuable. But to get that information, putting all the pieces together in terms of the technology, in terms of the, tying up all the problem statements and getting the people to be able to understand what techniques to apply, becomes very interesting. Secondly, for example, the minister was talking about environmental issues. In fact, I think recently we had some issues with the haze, and thanks to the people from NEA, they provided actually a lot of interesting data. And if you were to look at some of the open source that people have played around with, there are actually some visualizations being done by people with data from data.gov.sg. So one of the interesting things would be if you're able to detect, manage, and mitigate some of these forest fires. It doesn't have to be something that would come from a top-down approach. It could be something that could come from the community of practice. So now we actually do have a good collection of tools and technologies that could be useful to do some of these things to try to address some of these issues. But of course, we could actually use a lot more.
And this is a very nice slide. It's an extremely busy slide. It's a Cambrian explosion of open source tools to help you to do work, analysis, research, innovation in the open source space, especially around big data. You can go and look at this website that is mentioned at the bottom, the bigdata-startups.com. It's an enormous resource themselves of the amount of startups that are happening, open source projects, as the gentleman asked the question earlier. If you're going to start a new project, how do you get people excited about it? Go check out these guys as well. A lot of them are looking for help as well. Innovation that can happen. And I would love to see some of you having projects listed here as well at some point in the future, not too far away. But clearly, this is it's a Cambrian explosion stage. Every time you see an enormous number of projects happening in a particular space, that suggests to you that there is a lot of innovation happening. That's the time. It may be too late for you to get into it, but nonetheless, new insights are always welcome. And new ways of doing stuff is always welcome. So this is where a lot of innovation is happening. Next slide. So let's look at a case study and of visualizing training.
Okay, now, earlier part, you've heard Dr. Tan talking about social sense. It's one of the applications that is available that's been done by BATC in collaboration with partners. What I'm going to do actually to also show you another application that can be used to help visualize perhaps what training courses are about, what's inside the landscape. So this is entirely used, this is using actually a library known as D3JS, and it has a myriad of templates. And what you can do are some of these things. Let me just walk you through it. So for example, some of the dimensions that you can look at in this would be whether a particular course is actually funded by WDA. And you can actually put some color coding to it. Yeah. And it gets more interesting when you start looking at perhaps dividing the courses. For example, what's available for business analytics training if they are divided into some key dimensions. For example, are there courses that relates to strategy, courses that relates to technology development, specifically on the data value chain that deals with the process or with change management. And then you can actually go down to, for example, the various providers. So this becomes a little interesting in the sense that if you look at the various providers, you see a lot of bubbles and different colors. That gives you a sense. Depending on which particular point of view are you taking? Are you an end user or a company? Or you're specifically looking at in terms of policy development, you could have a lot of very interesting information that could come out of this. Like for example, for this one, you will notice that there are certain providers, they are focusing on certain areas of course development. And you can also go down to say, for example, the duration. Who is particularly providing in courses in specific time frames, for example, in terms of number of days, number of weeks, or number of months. Okay, and this is just another representation in terms of the various courses, whether or not they are in any particular specific funding. And finally, in terms of the providers, let me just switch back to the slides. So what does this all mean? Now, in terms of just an application for fast prototyping, you can pretty much have the various necessary tools and technologies that are available. But it's the value proposition that's actually quite critical, and it's different for different stakeholders. So for example, if you're an end user and you're trying to use a tool like this, you'll be asking different types of questions. For example, the thing that probably will come up foremost in your mind is, what's the best course that fits my learning needs? Or are there any personalized recommendations that I could have in order to get the kind of courses from the specific providers that are available out there? Now, if you're an organization, your business questions will be quite different. So you'll be thinking in terms of, okay, are there holistic training programs that I can design for my employees? Okay, are there any specific areas that I would like to build capability and skills on? So then you can target which providers and which courses to send your staff to. Okay, if you're a training provider, this particular tool is a peek into some interesting questions as well. For example, if I'm able to know or have some insights on my competitors, does this give me something different in terms of what I can offer to people? Okay, and also specifically, where is my niche? What are my blue ocean areas? Now, in terms of on a national level, if you're building skill set to support the companies in Singapore, as a policymaker, there are many areas in which we can actually look at to see which are the areas that you can invest in building BA capability. And then, of course, who are the key players that you should be working with. For new businesses, this is also interesting in the sense that this gives you insights into perhaps what are the new services that could be offered. Perhaps insights could be offered as a form of service as well. And maybe there are also new businesses that could co-create. Okay. But are we missing something? One of the things that companies have also given us feedback is that they are well aware of some of these tools and they're building on to new applications, but they find that it can't address all the business needs itself. So there are also other critical components of the equation that needs to be addressed. For example, before you go out and build a tool using a particular technique or a technology, you have to have a good understanding of what are the business problems that are out there, and whether how real and how painful are these business problems. Because if they are not real and they are not painful, it's unlikely there will be a business model that can be built around it. Okay, and specifically, there are many techniques for analytics that can be applied. It's important for you to know what are the pros and cons, the costs and the benefits of each technique, which one applies to which particular problem. And then how do you translate all those problems into a viable solution that can be deployed? Because at the end of the day, somebody has to pay and somebody has to be able to fund for this development. And I think this is where a center like BATC comes in very strategically in terms of some of the activities that we are doing. We are looking more in terms of building the ecosystem and the community of practice that surrounds all these issues. Now, in terms of the value chain, BATC is actually working very closely with some of the partners. For example, the institutes of higher learning, the universities, the polytechnics, as well as various companies and their labs, to try to fill some of these niches in the ecosystem and be able to supply and provide some solutions to some of these real problems. So in terms of the ecosystem, I think one of the key reasons why we are working closely with Red Hat is to try to see what can be done to try to build up this community of practice to hopefully be one of many steps, as what the minister is saying. It's a long journey ahead to try to build and get everybody on this journey towards helping the whole sector.
So, what can you do today? I'm sure you are itching to do something now that you heard all these wonderful opportunities out there. So let's think about that. Next slide, please. So let's consider this. Next slide. I'm sure you've heard of this thing called the Large Hadron Collider in CERN in Switzerland. This is what they are doing today. They are collecting results from collisions of subatomic particles, 1 petabyte of data per second. Next slide. But today's computing systems aren't capable of recording them. How are you going to record 1 petabyte per second? So they have to devise clever ways to sieve through this data that is flowing in. And they only collect 1 out of every 10,000 events. So 9,999 are left on the side. They pick 1. Next slide. And then they pass that 1 through 10,000 processes, okay, and select 1% of the remaining events. Next slide. So that's 1% of 1 of 10,000 of 1 petabyte. So for science to progress, they are having to make this compromise in terms of the amount of data they can actually analyze. Now that's a problem. Are we missing something along the way? Will we be able to find, we think we have found the Higgs boson, but will we be missing something else? We don't know. We think we are not missing anything, but we don't know. So can we be more certain? Is there a way that we can solve this issue? Next slide. We believe we can. With using the use of open source tools helps you to make that leap. I'm not suggesting for a moment right now that we can store 1 petabyte of data per minute, but I think we should be able to be down that line much quicker than otherwise. So here's a call to action. I would love all of you to go and try and figure out the LHC's problem, but let's start first, simple. Let's go over to openshift.redhat.com. It's a platform as a service that you can sign up to, no cost. Go ahead and build your own application on multiple languages that you choose to. Node.js, which seems to be the flavor of the year, or Java, which was the flavor of last year, maybe the flavor of next year. Go get an account on GitHub. The reason I suggest GitHub is because there's a ton of different projects that you can start participating and contributing and taking into your own new project that you want to build on. Install Hadoop, as was mentioned by Jim earlier. You can install Hadoop on OpenShift for that matter. Get the data from data.gov.sg, and thank goodness we are going to have machine-readable data. That's been the bugbear for a long time, but we are getting there. And finally, when you think you have something interesting or you want to bounce off ideas with people who are doing this on a regular basis, BATC is there to help you. So the little QR code there, I hope one of you is actually testing it out, because I tested it, it worked. So I'm looking for more cameras to come up, but I don't see it yet. But the key message here is that go sign up. This is what you can do today. You don't have to wait for an invitation. Go sign up today. Next slide. Thank you from both of us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Harish and Wilson.
But one more thing. keep in mind and to observe the Bonferroni principle. I leave that as a homework for you. I want you to think about it. You can take a picture of this slide, that's fine. Go think about it. It's all very, very relevant to big data and how you do analytics.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Harish and Wilson. Can we give them a round of applause again?